I kept telling myself, one more year, and that is how I lost a decade. That sentence sounds simple when you hear it, but I can tell you from experience, there is a whole life hidden inside those 4 words. One more year. One more year to stay in the same job. One more year to wait before making the change. One more year to delay the conversation. One more year to start taking my health seriously. One more year to become disciplined. One more year to get my finances in order. One more year to stop living in reaction. One more year to figure out what I really want. I kept saying it because it sounded reasonable, temporary, responsible. It did not sound like surrender, it sounded like patience. But what I understand now is that one more year can become one of the most dangerous lies a man ever tells himself, because it makes delay feel harmless, while time is quietly taking something from you every single day. I did not think of myself as someone who was wasting his life. That is part of why this took so long to see. I was working, showing up, paying bills, handling responsibilities. I was not lazy, not reckless, not obviously falling apart. I looked like a man doing what grown men do. I carried pressure. I tolerated stress. I pushed through fatigue. I stayed practical. I made do. And because of that, I always had a defense ready. I'm not avoiding life. I'm just waiting for a better season. I'm not stuck. I'm just being realistic. I'm not giving up. I'm just trying to survive this year first. That is how men lose whole chapters of their lives without calling it loss. We do not always run from life dramatically. Sometimes we postpone it respectfully. I used to think time moved in big, obvious blocks. A year felt long, spacious, like something you could spend carelessly and still have plenty left. That is one of the great illusions of early and middle adulthood. You think 1 year does not sound like much. You tell yourself you will get serious next year, start next year, fix it next year, become more focused next year. But what you do not understand until later is that a year is never just a year. A year is habits becoming more fixed. A year is health shifting. A year is children getting older. A year is a marriage becoming either warmer or more distant. A year is your self-respect either getting stronger or weakening from more broken promises. A year is never empty. It is always building something, even if all it is building is more of the same. That was my life for too long. More of the same. More of the same stress. More of the same excuses. More of the same half-lived potential. More of the same private disappointment every time another year ended, and I had to admit, if only to myself, that I was still standing in almost the same place. I had become a man of postponed seriousness. I knew what needed to change in broad terms. I knew where I was drifting. I knew what I kept avoiding. But instead of acting, I negotiated. I reduced the scale of the truth until I could tolerate it. I told myself, not forever, just 1 more year. There is something especially dangerous about delay when it sounds mature. If I had been obviously self-destructive, maybe I would have seen the problem sooner. But my version of self-destruction looked responsible. It looked like keeping things stable. It looked like honoring obligations. It looked like being practical. That is how fear survives inside respectable men. It borrows the language of wisdom. It tells you not now, later. Be careful. Be reasonable. Don't do anything drastic. You've got time. Finish this year first. And because all of that sounds intelligent, you trust it. You do not notice that your life is slowly being organized around avoidance. I think some part of me always knew. That is the part that hurts. I knew enough to feel restless. I knew enough to feel the weight of my own delay. I knew enough to hear that quiet sentence in my head at the end of certain days. You cannot keep living like this forever. But then morning would come, responsibilities would return, and the pressure of ordinary life would drown out the deeper truth again. That is another way decades disappear. Not through one big deception, but through repeated interruptions of honesty. You get just close enough to truth to feel it, then retreat back into busyness before it can make demands on you. I had many versions of one more year. Sometimes it meant one more year in a job that was paying the bills but flattening my spirit. Sometimes it meant one more year before I got serious about my body. One more year before I stopped eating, sleeping, and living like someone who assumed his future health would somehow take care of itself. Sometimes it meant one more year before I became the kind of father or husband who was more emotionally present and not just materially useful. Sometimes it meant one more year before I admitted that my life was too reactive, too scattered, too built around surviving instead of intentionally choosing. The shape changed. The sentence stayed the same. And every time I said it, I felt a small wave of relief. That relief is part of the trap. Delay soothes you in the short term. It protects you from discomfort, from risk, from the pain of beginning, from the awkwardness of being inexperienced, from the disruption of telling the truth. One more year gives your conscience a place to sit down and go quiet for a while. It tells you that you are not refusing change, only postponing it. That feels much better. But life does not really care whether your avoidance is permanent or politely delayed. If the result is the same, the cost is the same. I remember years ending with a strange mixture of fatigue and self-disappointment, not dramatic shame, something quieter. I would look back and realize I had been busy the whole time, but not meaningfully transformed. I had handled things, survived things, dealt with things, but I had not become enough. Not in the areas that mattered most. I had not become more disciplined, more peaceful, more internally honest, more directed, more financially wise, more alive. I had simply stayed in motion, and motion can fool you. It can make you think you are progressing when really you are only repeating. That repetition changes a man. The first time you tell yourself next year, it may still feel like a plan. By the third or fourth time, something inside you starts to weaken. By the seventh or eighth, you stop fully trusting your own intentions. You become someone who can describe the life he wants, but cannot quite believe himself anymore when he says he will go after it soon. That is one of the deepest costs of postponement. It damages your relationship with your own word. You begin to suspect that your future promises are mostly emotional theater. Hopeful, sincere perhaps, but unreliable. And once a man stops trusting himself, even his dreams begin to shrink. That happened to me. I stopped dreaming with real force. Not because I had no desires left, but because desire had become painful. It is painful to want something you keep refusing to seriously pursue. It is painful to imagine a stronger life when your habits keep voting for a weaker one. So, over time, I learned how to reduce my hope, just enough to make my lack of action feel less humiliating. I called it realism. I said things like, "This is probably just life," or "Most people never really get to do what they want," or "Maybe peace is for people with fewer responsibilities." Those were not conclusions. They were sedatives. They helped me tolerate a life I had delayed changing for too long. I think that is why this topic matters so much. Because one more year is rarely about the calendar. It is about permission. Permission to keep avoiding the thing you already know. Permission to stay in the shape you have outgrown. Permission to remain half committed to your own becoming. The calendar is just where the lie gets stored. The real issue is fear. Fear of starting. Fear of disrupting. Fear of losing approval. Fear of looking foolish. Fear of admitting that some part of your life has already been wrong for longer than you want to face. I was afraid of all of that. Afraid to change the pace of my life. Afraid to risk failing publicly. Afraid to admit I had invested years into patterns that were not giving me what I thought they would. Afraid to stop calling my delay patience and start naming it avoidance. So instead, I bought more time. One more year. But time is not something you buy without consequence. It always charges interest. On your health, on your courage, on your marriage, on your children, on your self-respect, on your options. On the energy you imagine will still be there later. That last part is especially cruel. We assume the future version of us will have the same strength, the same openness, the same flexibility, the same emotional capacity to finally make the move. But that is not how life works. The later version of you may be wiser, yes, but he may also be more tired, more burdened, more afraid, more attached to the familiar, more shaped by the very delay you keep practicing now. One more year does not leave you unchanged while you wait. It trains you. It teaches you hesitation. It makes postponement feel normal. It builds a man who becomes increasingly practiced at not moving. That is how I lost a decade. Not in one disaster, not in one collapse, in repeated hesitation that looked understandable each time, 1 year at a time. That is what still stuns me when I look back. Any single year was explainable. Any single delay sounded rational. But stack enough rational delays together, and you get a life that feels heartbreakingly underlived. You get 10 years of almost. 10 years of maybe next year. 10 years of knowing and not doing. 10 years of becoming more familiar with your excuses than your courage. There came a point where I could no longer hide behind the language of patience. I had to admit the truth. If I kept saying 1 more year, eventually I would become the man who had spent his best years preparing to live instead of actually living. That thought terrified me, because by then I was already closer to that man than I wanted to be. I had enough evidence behind me to know this was no longer a motivational rough patch. It was a pattern, and patterns do not break because time passes. They break because a man finally tells the truth and then acts in a way that hurts his old identity. That is what change required from me. Not a grand speech, not inspiration, truth. The truth that I was not being patient. I was being afraid. The truth that I was not preserving my future. I was spending it. The truth that my life would not magically reorganize itself around what mattered most just because another year had gone by. The truth that time is not loyal to your intentions. It moves whether you act or not. I wish I had understood sooner that 1 brave year is better than 10 postponed ones. 1 honest year. 1 disciplined year. 1 year where you stop negotiating against your own life. 1 year where you stop saying later to things that are already costing you too much. The power of a year is not in how much time it gives you. It is in what you do with the days inside it. I spent too many years acting as if the existence of time was the same as the use of time. It is not. A decade can pass with very little real growth if the core pattern remains untouched. If I could speak to my younger self, I would tell him to stop worshiping a future that only exists in theory. I would tell him that 1 more year is rarely as harmless as it sounds. I would tell him that if the truth keeps returning, it is not because he needs more time. It is because he needs more courage. I would tell him that he does not need to blow up his life recklessly, but he does need to stop making his fear sound mature. I would tell him that by the time delay feels expensive, it already has been for a while. I would also tell him this: do not wait until you are sick of yourself to become serious. Do not wait until your self-respect is frayed from too many broken promises. Do not wait until your children are older, your marriage is colder, your body is weaker, your energy is lower, your options are fewer. Respect the year you are in while it is still yours in this form. Do not spend it in rehearsal. I kept telling myself, 1 more year. And that is how I lost a decade. I say that now not to drown in regret, but to tell the truth clearly enough that someone else may stop sooner. If that someone is you, then hear me. The life you keep planning to start later is already charging you now. Every repeated delay is shaping a future version of you. The question is whether it is shaping a man you will thank or a man you will someday grieve. 1 more year sounds small. That is why it is so dangerous.